we're seeing the consumer spending pressures that we're all hearing about, and people maybe trading out of a higher end or more expensive restaurant occasion and coming back to pubs. That's something we've seen through the GFC as well. Like that's something that's real. That's what's happens. We're definitely, I mean, our trading's going fantastic at the moment. We're flying really across everything in the pubs.
Welcome to What Matters. Very excited, as always, to be joined by the co-founder of MA Financial Group, the chairman of the Sydney Swans, the founder of this podcast, the group vice chairman of MA Financial. It's a long list of accolades, Andrew. Welcome to the podcast.
It sounds impressive, Tom, if only people knew the truth. But I've always wanted to be on the front bar, and this is the next best thing.
We're at the Willoughby Hotel this morning, where we're joined by Chris Unger, who's the head of hospitality at MA Financial Group, runs our portfolio of pubs. Chris, a warm welcome to What Matters. This is pretty exciting being here.
Thanks, Tom. It is. It's good to be what's for us a bit like home in the pubs. This is one of our favourite pubs here at Willoughby Hotel. We've been involved in this pub probably 15 or more years. I've been around this pub, so it's good to have you here, and thanks for joining us.
We tested this pub yesterday. It was magnificent. It's a fantastic environment here. We'll get to all that sort of stuff shortly. But just to explain, obviously, MA Financial co-invest and operate venues depending on which ones we buy and sell. But it's an interesting involvement in this aspect of the hospitality sector, Chris and Andrew.
Yeah, we've got around about 35 pubs at the moment, and we've been, I guess this business that we've got's been going for a long time in terms of acquiring, operating hotels. We got involved with MA Financial or Moelis at the time back in 2017 when Andrew came along, and we've since then we've had a pretty successful, or I would say very successful relationship in what we've been able to achieve and build out. And we've got a fantastic platform that can take these hotels and invest in them, improve them, lead our people well. And it's been a great time. And it's been an outstanding, I think, asset class over that time that's just continued to improve and get better and better.
Yeah, it's been outstanding. I mean, the philosophy at MA Financial in terms of real estate is to buy irreplaceable assets and have management teams who are highly focused and expert in what they do, because you can't be expert in everything, as we know. And when we acquired Redcape back in 2017, the management team came with it. We manage the hotels, and it's been a fantastic performance. The IRR on Redcape's been fantastic for investors. I know I'm an investor, so we love the asset class.
Andrew, how did it first come across your desk?
We'd been looking at pubs for some time, and we actually had an involvement with a group called Nelson Mears. We had a partnership on a couple of pubs in Western Sydney. We really liked the asset class. Redcape was available to be owned by some private equity firms, and we'd had a really good look at it. We really liked the dynamics of the assets in terms, particularly, we saw it as irreplaceable real estate, prime real estate, typical like the Willoughby Hotel sitting here in a prime spot in the main street of Willoughby on the Lower North Shore. For those who aren't from Sydney, the leafy and affluent Lower North Shore. It's a fantastic place, just near Chatswood. Irreplaceable real estate, and here sits an asset that's been, I don't know how old, Chris, this building is, but it's been here a long time. I think
it was around 1899 thereabouts this pub opened up the first time.
So, it's a really prime location, and it's an asset that's thrived through 100 years. So it just proves how resilient the asset class is. And that's what we really love, is assets that you can own long term, add value to. They deliver a lot of good cash flow, and importantly, they're places where the community gathers, people employed. I mean, this pub here, Chris, what are you saying, 50 people?
Yeah, we're around 50 staff work here, around about 1,200 across the entire group that we manage, and yeah,
it's extraordinary.
Lots of people.
I know
when
I went to uni, a lot of my uni mates, that's how they paid their way through university, was working in pubs, and I always used to like to go and visit them on a Thursday night to make sure that their work was going okay.
Yeah, well, that's where a lot of people start, and people like myself get stuck, but it's been a wonderful trip for me. But you start out as a hospitality job, starts as a part-time type job for most people, but you just get swept up in, it's great to be around people. It's great to work with people. It's great to have customers having a good time in your pub. It's a really enjoyable place to work and be, and it's also obviously pretty enjoyable for customers.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the great things about hospitality. It's very similar to our marina business, Del Bora, or even shopping centres, which I've been in shopping centres my entire career. And what I love about it is just seeing people enjoying themselves and gathering and out and about, and I just feel good. I'm a real estate person. I just feel so good being in real estate, and particularly in a pub where it's a bit confusing for me being here when the sun's out in the morning, but I can get used to it, I think. But just great assets.
Yeah. Well, I started out in the industry on my 18th birthday. I was never really long for school at that time. I had better things to do in my life. But I started out in the industry, got really just in love with being around people and working with people and the customers, and spent a lot of time on both sides of the bar, more time on the side you guys probably haven't spent too much in. And
I worked at a pub at uni, Chris. So I used to like the tax effective tips. They got me. They got me through. I was able to.
We should move to America because Trump's they won't be taxable at all. And Chris, what's changed in pubs over that time? Because obviously there's been a lot of change.
Well, yeah. I mean, yes, there has and there hasn't. So there's been a lot of change in the way pubs work and what happens and the way things go on. I remember when I first started, you used to go into the keg room, the old downstairs cellar, if you remember the stories, and you'd have holes in the roof of the cellar from where the old kegs you used to tap. If you weren't doing it properly, they'd just shoot off up in the top and hit the ceiling. There's holes everywhere and could kill people. It was pretty dangerous. So all the beer you were drinking out the front, people were putting themselves in great danger to get that to you. So those sort of real old ways of doing what was doing. But
so you started behind the bar and as a bouncer, or what were you doing?
I was picking up glasses, cleaning up ashtrays people used to smoke in the pubs and back in those days. And
where was that, Chris?
Up on the Central Coast.
Yeah.
Up in a club up on the Central Coast is where I'm from.
So you started mopping the floors, wiping the tables, getting those beer marks off your hand, right to running the group. I mean, that's a pretty incredible story.
Yeah, I think I just love the industry. I love being around people. I love working with people. So that kind of kept me in. I guess I've always had a bit of curiosity and a willingness to work pretty hard. And so I got about learning and finding out why things worked, how things worked, and progressed my way through. And I think the industry can be the kind of place that if you want to stick with it, you can work your way through, obviously. And it's taken me around the world, as I said. So I've worked in the casinos in Macau and come back to Sydney. That was 07, 08. Seen a lot of things, done a lot of things. I went back and studied after, went back and did a commercial law degree as I was older. So I got that, scratched that itch as well and obviously learned a bit from that. But it was really on the job and working with people. And I just think most things in life, if you can work with people and lead people, you go a long way pretty quick. And that's what you learn in a place like this. You see people at their best and their worst, and you have a lot of fun and you learn how to be with people. And I think with a lot of hard work, a little bit of luck, that's where I'm here.
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing, Tom, one thing we look at is, as an investor myself and as Vice Chairman of MA Financial, we want the people who are running our assets and managing our assets who deeply understand them and love them and have built their careers working them. We don't want a bunch of investment bankers going in and saying, well, I can run a pub or a marina. You actually want people with genuine, deep operational skills and experience. You can't replace that with any degree, with any amount of spin. You need people who know what they're doing. I think the most useless experience you had is probably law.
Probably.
That was a waste of time.
That's not good for anything. The world would be a better place with more pubs and less lawyers.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Well, we're heading towards Christmas. I'm always fascinated as we head towards Gravy Day, 21st of December. Big Paul,
Andrew's big into world great. Can you just explain that, Andrew?
Big Paul Kelly fan. Well, of course, How to Make Gravy is one of his great hits about Christmas Day. And one of my great mates is Paul Kelly, the former Sydney Swans captain. So we always celebrate Gravy Day at the Swans. What foods, what drinks, is it beer, wine, light beer, non-alcoholic drinks, schnitzels, burgers, pizza? What are people going to be consuming?
Or anything that can go with gravy, I would suggest it might be. So I think the big classics in pubs are the chicken schnitzels. It's quite a unique feature. Another, it's a little bit unique, the pubs, in what they are. All over the world, there's nothing really like them. And even within Australia, it's got its own niche with chicken schnitzels, palmies, burgers, rumps, those kind of what we call the classics, the things that you can probably cook at home if you wanted to, but nowhere near as good. And so
they
you
never
come out
taste
to
as
the
good as in a
pub
pub, do they?
That's right. They just don't.
It's an interesting issue, though. So there's the classics, and pubs have evolved over time. But what we do at Redcape and MA, the menu evolves. So, for example, this week, you've partnered up at the Brunswick with a really famous restaurant group. So pubs have gone gastro and they've stuck with the classics. It's an evolving landscape, obviously, with F&B.
Yeah, I think also in this current market, we're seeing the consumer spending pressures that we're all hearing about, and people maybe trading out of a higher end or more expensive restaurant occasion and coming back to pubs. And that's something we've seen through the GFC as well. Like that's something that's real. It's what's happens. We're definitely. I mean, our trading's going fantastic at the moment. We're flying really across everything in the pubs, and it's a lot of that shifting out of an expensive night out into something that's more accessible and still of great quality. And the collaboration we're doing with the Ducks up at Bruns is still about making a pub experience and a pub offer. It's not trying to turn it into a high-end restaurant or anything like that, because that's what I think the Australian customer wants within a pub. Australian customers got a pretty preset expectation of a pub.
It's more relaxed.
It is. It's relaxed. It's accessible. The price point's far more reasonable.
So the cost of living aspect of pubs, and I see our turnover numbers in our portfolio, which, as you said, have been incredibly strong, and they typically, through all economic cycles, seem to perform really well. What's happening with wine? Wolf Blass is a good friend of mine. He's 90 years old, but the real Wolf Blass, Wolfgang, South Australia, he was telling me, I was with him a few weeks ago, and he was telling me that the day of the expensive bottle of wine is over. People aren't spending $300 on a bottle of wine anymore. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think particularly in the off-premise. So we've got 30-odd bottle shops, people taking retail liquor off-premise as well. And through that, there's definitely been what you might call a downsizing in the spend per transaction. So people have traded down their product in terms of the price point, but you can get a great wine at a pretty reasonable price these days. It's not something that you have to go and spend a lot on to still get a good product. And so we're definitely seeing people do that. But the actual total spend and total consumption that we're seeing is still pretty strong. People are just maybe a similar theme to the restaurant, moving into something more accessible and better value. People are really hunting for value, and wherever we put value, people are really drawn to it. And I think you're seeing that in the wine.
Just in terms of some of those trends we're seeing with the drink mix, I'm old school, Chris. I'm a bit of a Carlton Draft man. It probably reflects my Victorian roots. I don't know if that's a Victorian thing, but it feels like it. What's happening in the beer space at the moment in terms of what people are drinking? There's a lot of different options now.
Yeah, beer's been interesting in the last 10 years with the emergence of the craft. Well, it's emerged well before that, but really dominated and really hit its straps, so to speak, the craft. So there's a lot of craft ranging and alternate beer offers for particularly younger consumers. The older, people like my father, God bless him, is going to always drink the same sort of beer, and that's what that generation did and continues to do. And that's many ways how pubs haven't changed over all this time. There's still community pubs where people go for a beer, and it's always been that way, and I suspect it will always be. But draft beer, people have moved into mid-strength, and so the number one beer for us would be the Great Northern Mid. So very open taste profile. It's not offensive. It's easy to drink.
There's definitely a trend towards
well.
people drinking less. I know my wife now hardly has a drink. I keep telling her she should have a few just to make me more interesting to her. But is that something we're seeing?
It's not what we're seeing. I think we've probably seen people shift out of cocktails and expensive cocktails in those type of markets. But again, we're still seeing lots of consumption. And
I guess if you're going to a pub, you're probably going to have a drink.
That's right. That's what you're there for, right? Yeah.
And what in terms of the revenue items, for those that aren't familiar with the business of pubs, what are the revenue items? How do they tick?
So you got the usual, as you'd expect, the front bar and bar revenue, food revenue. Our gaming revenue, of course, is an important part and large part of a successful or viable pub business. There's also off-premise takeaway retail liquor that we have as well. Accommodation. Remember, old pubs all started being a little place with rooms above, and
is that coming back?
Yeah, it is. It is. I think with people looking for beds and places to stay, that's obviously a bit of a challenge in the wider society. But definitely, pub accommodation is a like all parts of the pubs,
Yeah.
it's an important part.
Because a lot of the traditional high street pub, there's often the second story where there's pigeons living and those sorts of things.
Yeah, which that happened because of viability. For a long time, it was difficult to make it viable to have accommodation at a pub, but it's very strong now with rates and room rates and what you can get from your accommodation. It makes it a good, viable part of the business. But also, I guess, strategically, it's important to make sure that revenue is diverse across the pub. And so getting into some more accommodation revenue is an important strategic direction to go to. Gaming's obviously an important part of the business model, and it's a large part of revenue. It's something that Aussies love and have as long as I've been in the business. I guess I'm nearly 30 years in and being around punters and pub and club customers, and it's a part of what society is and does, and people love it. And
That's probably why Melbourne Cup Day must be one of the biggest days of the year.
Exactly, and it's just a part of what people do. It's an entertainment form, and obviously there's people that do it tough in it, and we've got to, as operators, be very responsible with that, and we've got to make sure we're on the front foot of new initiatives to help in that way, which there's a lot happening at the moment, which is great. I've been in this industry so long. I want my kids to have a wonderful career in an industry like this, so it needs to be sustainable. And getting on the front foot of those type of things is something we've always thought pretty hard about and taken seriously.
I was going to touch on our two properties up in the Northern Rivers at Byron and obviously Brunswick Heads, but just on the accommodation point, Chris, like we've just take us through the existing accommodation offering in the portfolio. Like, for example, I've stayed at the Byron Bay Hotel. It's quite an iconic place to stay around that.
Yeah, it's beachfront Byron Bay. It's a beautiful place. It's irreplaceable. You can't get more of those. They're not making them anymore, so to speak, right?
It's arguably, I often say this to people, arguably one of the best pieces of real estate in Australia. When you go to particularly the beach, but also Brunswick, they're just amazing.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd say it's arguable. I think it's pretty black and white, but I'm obviously biased. It is right on Main Beach. See the whales come in, the population, people walking past, the lifestyle. It's a great place to be.
In terms of the staffing, you talked about the number of people that work in a pub. Obviously, wages is a big proportion of the economics. What are the dynamics there, and what do you see in terms of wage growth and the impact on the economics of pubs?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. Wages and I guess first jobs, as we spoke about earlier, pubs are really a key part of that in the community. We paid around about 60 million in wages last year. So even just that give back to the community in terms of the economic activity that a pub provides, it's a really important part of how they work and what they do. From a workforce planning point of view and cost, obviously there's been escalations in wage. A lot of our workforce is on the award wages, which are going up around that 4% over the last couple of years.
And can you get staff?
Yeah. It's getting back to pretty manageable, normal times. I think there was this blip where people weren't working in hospitalities and those kind of careers.
Everyone wanted to go and work at Bunnings for some reason.
Yeah, I guess that's right. But that's pretty smooth. It's pretty easy.
Well, Chris, you're probably more rugby league if you've come from the Central Coast, but Tom's, you may not understand, there's a football club in Victoria called Collingwood. They're not very big. Earlier this week, the Sydney Swans senior coach John Longmire retired after coaching 333 games, taking us to 5 grand finals over 14 seasons. It's much better than Collingwood's achieved.
Very impressive, Andrew.
And it was a big day. We announced his retirement. We announced the appointment of a new coach, Dean Cox. And as we were finishing the press conference, which was live, which was quite daunting, doing a sort of live television press conference, first thing Dean said to me, "We're going to have a beer after this. It's been a big day." And so where do we go to celebrate but a pub? And just thinking about the community and where people do go to celebrate and wind down, it was a fantastic evening. Went there with the coaching staff and just had a few drinks, and it really is ingrained in our whole culture, isn't it? The pub is a place for celebration.
Absolutely, and your favourite pub's where your mates are, right? And it's just the way that pubs work, and it's a great feature of what they are.
Tom's a Collingwood fan. I don't think he has any mates.
No mates, Prideaux, and the unfortunate, there's lots of benefits living in Sydney. The only detriment I find is on my local pub, the smallest screen in the pub has the AFL, and the rest have got NRL. So
We'll buy that pub.
We'll
We'll have to have names. We'll fix that. Anyone who wants to come to the Willoughby Hotel, it's 24-hour Sydney Swans.
But AFL features prominently on any of our Redcape screens, right, Chris?
It does, and sport in a pub's another great part of it, right? I think if you remember when the Matildas were going gangbusters not that long ago, and when the World Cup was on, pubs were full. People have the stories of where they were when the game went into extra time and the shootout. They were in a pub.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID, I recall this very clearly. Values and earnings in pubs were absolutely flying, and obviously COVID, it's very hard to make money for those who aren't aware when the pub shut. I presume. Where is it today? Post-COVID earnings, and what's the typical value of a pub done since pre-COVID to post-COVID, for example, and yield?
Well, the COVID impact itself and through that COVID time, yield really tightened up and pub values continued to grow. And I think that people were seeing that the asset class was very resilient through all those type of events. Then the interest rate escalation happened, which put a little bit of a handbrake on a lot of things and certainly in pub cap rates as well. But over the last 20 years, that pubs have been the kind of assets that they are now, remembering that pubs in the 90s were not doing so great. Through the late 90s, when gaming became a part of a pub, the viability of the asset class demonstrably improved. But it was very cottage, and it was kind of that.
And we saw the impact
industry.
of smoking bans, for example.
Those regulatory impacts have come along over time as well. And if you go back far enough, when drink driving came in, there were things that have been good social.
It's one of the things that when we made the investment decision after doing a huge amount of work to actually enter the pub industry, because it's a legitimate and large investment class. And one of the things that really impressed us is when there have been those regulatory hits, or such as the smoking bans, which was a big one, the strength of the pub market is that they've just pushed through those blips pretty quickly.
Yeah, there have been short-term impacts that have come through for long-term strengths. And every time those type of regulatory changes occur, you remove a risk.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what we've seen. And on the other side now of the interest rates where they are, because of the sophistication that's happened in the asset class over the 15 years, the operators, pubs aren't rocket science. They're not landing a spaceship, but they're the kind of thing that you need to know what you're doing, or you're going to make some big mistakes pretty quickly. And it's difficult for people, mums and dads, to get access into the space now because the ticket price for a pub is out of reach of many people. But the sector's very sophisticated now. There's a lot of serious capital that's come into it over the last 10 to 15 years. And that has definitely tightened the spread between the cost of debt or cost of capital and the yield on pubs. It's quite tight.
So Redcape clearly has sold a few pubs over the past 12 to 18 months. How have those sales gone relative to their book values, and why did we sell, and what's the outlook for selling more, buying more? What's the thing?
Yeah, so we've sold off around about 400 mil worth of pubs, and that's not an insignificant number in a market like this. And we've done that to generational participants, so people who have been through all the cycles and want to continue to invest in the class.
There's often families that own pubs.
Exactly. And people that have been through all the ups and downs and have that ability to see that over long term, this asset class is very resilient and strong. And so we've been able to get through that. And that for us, that was some capital management and just being able to reduce some debt and address some redemptions for investors that have been with us a long time, like long-time investors from the beginning. Most people were just needing to trim, and that was fair enough with everything else that was going on. And so we've cleaned all that up with what we've been able to do. And now we're looking to acquire assets that have the potential for greater value and higher yield for us. So income is very important for our investor base. So we're taking the steps to make sure we've got a higher yield of the fund, which gives better distribution for our investors and the ability for us to identify some new assets we can add more value to and repeat that cycle again.
Yep.
You can, when you acquire a pub, you get out, as we were talking this morning, you want to walk through it, you feel it, you see it, you go and you spend time as a customer, you really understand it. And there's pubs and there's pubs, and getting the right place where you can see how you can add value to it, you can see how your team can actually work within this pub and make it work, and look to grow it.
So why we've sold a number of pubs, obviously you said hundreds of millions of dollars worth from memory, at above book value.
That's right.
And so why would we, as a layperson, why would we be selling pubs if we're now going to buy pubs? What's the sort of commercial logic behind that?
Yeah, well, we're looking to, as I say, increase the yield, get a higher distribution for investors on the fund. We think that in this stage of the cycle, it's an opportune time to look to do that, and we'll redeploy that capital into different markets. So we're looking at the moment Southeast Queensland as an example. We've got a spread of pubs up that way. We've sold out of some pubs across New South Wales, and we've sold a couple out of Northern Queensland as well. And we're looking at different pubs that we can add value to. It's not our thesis to try and roll up this vehicle to be a 300 venue vehicle.
Yeah.
We want to find pubs we can acquire well, add value to, and over time recycle them. And what we've done over the last 2 years is we've been in that recycle phase where we've sold out some pubs, when we're now going in to look to find some more that we can add value to.
It's incredibly important, as I mentioned earlier on. Part of our thesis of investing in real estate is that wherever you can, you actually operate the assets, and we manage our own shopping centres, we manage our marinas, and with pubs, being able to add value, I guess that's a really important thing, because often you're buying pubs presumably from mum and dad operators who may not be maximising it or don't have the capital to maximise it, and we can do that.
That's right. It's probably the latter. I think that you can definitely find some pubs that are underdone for various different reasons, but most people know what they're doing, and so you've got to be able to add whatever your competitive advantage is to be able to do that. And quite often it's the capital and being able to reinvest in it. So we've got a team of people who, that's what they do, is just go and how do we optimise a venue and make it, add earnings that way.
How much does our scale help in terms of delivering on the operating performance? You mentioned it was a cottage industry, but in terms of economies of scale, staffing, marketing, your know-how,
buying
the group's
chicken
know-how,
schnitzels in bulk.
buying chicken schnitzels in bulk, how much does that help from an operational perspective?
It definitely helps. It definitely helps. I think at the moment it's helping more than it has in a long time with all the inflation on costs that everyone's hearing about. That scale and buying is really
things like
powerful.
electricity, for example, which I know is a big cost.
Yeah, well, electricity, that's very difficult to manage, that one. But the chickens and those sort of areas where you can buy on scale, that helps. Probably where scale adds most value, though, is by giving the portfolio scale benefit. What I mean by that is things always go wrong. You'll always have pubs doing well and others doing not so well. But because we've got the scale at a portfolio level, that really smooths all of those problems out. And as I say, things always go wrong. We're not perfect. We're not even anywhere near that. And having that scale allows you to balance out. So we don't move really much from our forecast. It's not a very variable.
It's been very consistent, hasn't it? That's one thing I've noticed.
Within at a pub level, there's things going up and things going down all the time. So that's I think the most valuable attribute of scale is that portfolio benefit that we have.
And as a unique part of pubs, Andrew and Chris, I'm a bit uninitiated in this regard, but obviously with higher interest rates, we've seen office in some sectors come off. But we mentioned before book value or selling assets above book value and switching into higher yielding pubs. But the ones that you've sold, you've got good prices for. So pub prices have been quite resilient post-COVID, haven't they?
They definitely stepped back down. There was the boom on the back of zero. What was it, 10 basis point cash rate. Like everything went through the moon, and they've come back 10 to 15% at a full price level, and we took that pain 12 months ago now. We went and redid the portfolio. We've gone back and revalued pretty much all of it with independent valuations, and we took that out. So now where we're at, we've set at a level that we think's ready now for the earnings to push through.
I agree, and we're likely to see the interest rate cycle now go the other way at some point, whether it's mid next year, early next year, who knows? But
yeah.
It's like one of the things that is a very clear dynamic of pubs is that typically they're in the suburbs, some in the country, but typically in the suburbs, you've seen a change in workforce behaviour in terms of people going into the CBD. You've seen, and the big thing we're now seeing, and we're going to see a lot of, in my opinion, is a lot more housing density in the suburbs around transport hubs, which pubs typically are near transport hubs, near train stations and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
What do you think that's going to, what sort of dynamic does that do in terms of turnover and likely values in the future?
It's definitely pushed a lot of people out of the regions as well. And so regional pubs, suburban pubs have really benefited from that. So there's lots more people around out and about in the suburbs. The city's doing pretty well also. We bought a pub in the city in April, and it's people just constantly busy in there. So the cities have come back for us, but definitely I think the suburban pubs have been benefited from that. They've boosted, and with all that continued development,
Well, I think
can't see it
with the
change.
government supporting shop top housing and higher density around main streets, it can only be positive, I would have thought.
I think so, and I think you've seen that in all the major markets. I think Brisbane, Western Sydney.
We touched on this earlier in terms of trends, but people talk about the beer economy. We're coming into an election year, Chris. What are you seeing in terms of beer sales at the moment? Are there any hints there on, is it a leading economic indicator like people say it is?
Well, what we're seeing is people are drinking a lot of beer.
That's good.
Yeah, I think that, as I said, people are continuing to flock into pubs, and there has been a little bit of a shift in terms of frequency of visit, maybe come off a little bit, which obviously impacts spend. But then when there's an event on, everyone comes in, and anything that was saved or not spent, it balances out. So we're still moving a lot of kegs.
And what do you think the next trend is in pubs, if there's such a thing? I mean, they've been stable over time. We mentioned gaming before. It all started with two up about 150 years ago. Some things change, some things stay the same. But what do you think is the next trend in pubs?
I think the fabric of what pubs are, coming and talking to people, just stays the same. I think that's what people want to do, and that's the big thing in pubs. I don't see them materially changing into something else. I think there's a little bit of a shift towards RTD, ready to drinks, rather than the beer and the draft beer categories, and those things are evolving. They continue to evolve, and they've evolved all the time. But I think it's just come and have a beer with your mate and have a cheap, affordable meal and a punt.
It makes sense. I mean, if you think about restaurants and Uber Eats and home delivery services, obviously our family use it. They turn up with the meal at home and you eat it at home. You don't go to the restaurant, but you're not going to go and get Uber to bring you, a couple of pints of beer, are you?
No.
You can do that today. But people want to go to the pub
All
too.
the time with your friends, or the time with the people that you want to be around. Like Uber's never going to bring you that.
What is your beer of choice at the pub, Brito?
Red wine.
Red wine. Chris?
I'm a Bolter XPA, which is, I guess, representative of that shift. So my old man's a black beer guy. I like a little bit more floral, a bit more hop.
And Chris, you've got a big night Wednesday night. You're launching the new menu offering at the Brunswick, which we've touched on a couple of times.
That's right. So we're very excited with that. I think the best thing about that is we've been able to collaborate with these guys, which has given us the opportunity at Redcape Hospitality to showcase what we can do as well.
They've got the farm in Byron?
They do.
Yeah.
And so the way we've structured this is the Daz and Andy, the guys there, have helped come along with the menu, and we're building on the great brand of what the Brunswick already is with their great brand to put out some pretty special secret sauces on the pub.
Okay, I'm going to be up there and have a look.
Wednesday night. You can stay at the Beach Hotel. Andrew, since our last podcast, a lot's happened in the world. Interest rates at the moment, there's a lot of discussion, obviously, off the back of the inflation figures this week, particularly the underlying inflation. There's a big debate about whether that's representative of the economy. But notwithstanding that, where do you see interest rates at the moment, and what do you think thoughts on movements or mooted movements as soon as February?
Are you trying to come back to my prediction back in February that Trump would win the election?
You were right on that, 100% right on that, Andrew. We might get that audio out.
I just thought I'd drop that in. Look, I think interest rates, certainly in Australia, are going to stay where they are. I've been consistent on this. I don't see them going up. I haven't seen them going up since the last increase. I think they stay where they are. Probably till mid next year. I think the economy is reasonably strong. I think we're seeing that in the pub numbers. People are out spending money. And I think we'll have an election, whether it's March, April or May next year. And I think there'll be a fair bit going on in the economy as a consequence of what always happens around federal elections. But I think interest rates pretty much stay where they are, but I think the economy's in great shape. I'm really optimistic.
And you mentioned Trump. Off the back of that, we're seeing him make appointments across all those portfolios, Andrew. It's having obviously huge effects on the investment markets. I imagine lots of opportunities and potential detriments. What sort of work are you doing at the moment on assessing where there's opportunities coming out off the back of that?
Well, there's always opportunities, no matter what the markets and the economies are doing. I think the risk of interest rates going up, which drives so much in terms of investment performance, is very low. Yet the economy is quite strong. So I think we're in a fairly stable economic environment where the risk is on the upside. That as rates start to come down, I think we can have a really good market, and we're seeing that. We're looking at a lot of real estate now. I'm really optimistic about shopping centres, our marina business, pubs, obviously. And the other thing I'm really positive about is residential. I just think the cost of construction, the dynamics in terms of supply are really favourable to investing capital. And I think these are the times when, in terms of investing money, investing your nest egg, this is when you want to sort of put your foot down a bit and be a bit aggressive, because I think the opportunities are fantastic.
Just one more on that. Do you see a thematic there, Andrew, where at a discount you're looking at things at a discount to replacement cost? I mean, we mentioned construction costs and building costs, but maybe this is a time in the market where, if you consider the cost of replacing assets, it's probably a good time to buy it.
I think there'd be very few assets that are trading in the markets, whether it's residential, shopping centres, pubs, marinas, that when you take into account all of the planning issues in terms of building anything, and then the cost of construction, time, financing, I think there'd be very few things that are selling at above replacement costs. They're all selling at below replacement cost. Gives a great safety net for investment, and this is the time to really put money to work, in my opinion.
Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure. Just quickly, what's the main thing on your agenda in the first quarter of next year? What are you looking forward to?
Well, we're in the process of locking away a couple of acquisitions at the moment. So getting those in and onboarding those and taking them forward's the number one job next year.
Andrew, what's in your agenda?
Probably going to speak to the guy with the trays out the back.
That's one benefit.
This doesn't happen on the front bar.
I'm actually, when we're finished here, I'm actually going to go and send this clip to Chris Jones, who runs the front bar at Channel 7, and suggest you go on there next year. You've already really done it now.
Look, I wouldn't want to make Nick Malloy and the others. I mean, Titus O'Reilly's a mate of mine. I wouldn't want to make him look second rate.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Chris, thanks for coming on What Matters.
Thanks, Tom.
We talk about pubs all day. Andrew, as always.
Great talking. Thanks, Chris.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks for that.